Welcome to the sixth episode of the Uncharted 80s podcast. I'm here with my good buddy Noel. Hey, welcome, Noel.
Hi, welcome.
For those that are listening for the first time, our podcast shines a light on those bands from the 80s that have perhaps been forgotten or haven't had the profile we believe they should have done. And today, Noel, we're featuring Its Immaterial. Have you heard of them?
Yes, indeed. In fact, I think their fans call them Itsy. I think that's their nickname. But yes,
Good
definitely
knowledge.
heard of them.
Like it.
And Driving Away from Home, obviously, is the big song.
Hey, now just get in and close the door and put your foot down. You know, I like this suburb we're going through. I've been around here many times before. When I was young, we were going to move out this way for the clean air, healthy, you know, away from the factories and the smoke. I like that shop too. You can get anything there. So just get in and we'll go for a ride. Yes, we'll go driving away from home, 30 miles or more. And we'll go moving away from home without a care.
Yeah, that's probably their best known song. We'll do more on that a bit later, but that got to number 18 in the charts in 86. But in this episode, we're going to be talking to John Campbell from Its Immaterial. But I thought a bit of background first.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I know that Its Immaterial are a band that you're very passionate about them, and it feels like you've been into them for a really long time. I just wonder where that came from.
Yeah, I mean, it probably goes right back to when I was first married in 87. Back in those days, a bit like yourself, we were pretty poor in terms of income, and
Yes,
we
definitely
didn't really in those days you didn't really go out much. So we used to stay in and play board games. And one of the things that we used to do alongside that was listening to our sort of vinyl collection. And I had basically two records on repeat. One was the Lloyd Cole and the Commotions Mainstream, and the second one was the It's Immaterial album, Life's Hard and Then You Die.
Right.
And their story is particularly interesting. I don't know if you know how much you know about them. They came from a band called the Yachts, and the Yachts were sort of a band from Liverpool in late 70s, 77-ish, and they actually had been previously known as Albert Dock.
Right, the Liverpool connection, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That they had supported the Sex Pistols at one of their really early performances back in 76. They played their first show as the Yachts at Eric's nightclub in Liverpool.
Wow, famous place.
More importantly, though, supporting Elvis Costello. And that actually, from what I can read, is that actually got them the contract with Stiff Records. And they released a single called Suffice to Say.
I'm just a young romantic fool. I wrote this specially for you. Although the rhyme is not that hot, it's quite a snappy little tune. I'm sure you'll like the chorus too. It's short, sweet and to the point. It even says that I love you. Just after this, suffice to say you love me. I can't say that I blame you. Suffice to say I love you too. So what you think of it so far? You know I'm feeling rather proud. My words have never been that strong.
Now I know that one, and that's good. That's a good song.
Is a great song.
So who were in the Yachts? What were the band members?
So the Yachts were a guy called Bob Bellis, who was on drums, John Campbell on vocals, Martin Dempsey on bass guitar and vocals, and Mick Shiner, and then Henry Priestman on vocals and keyboards, and Martin Watson on guitar and vocals.
Right. So there's a few in the band there. So yeah,
there is.
And
there is a number there. But more importantly, the bit for Its Immaterial is that they were formed off the back of the Yachts. So John J.J. Campbell, Martin Dempsey, and Henry Priestman all joined or formed Its Immaterial.
Oh, that's interesting. So it wasn't just John who went off and started a new band with another bunch of guys. They pretty much evolved
It was
into
three
Its
of them.
Material.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean they put a guy called Paul Barlow on drums, but interestingly enough, in 1984, the band sort of were reduced to a duo with a guy called Jarvis Whitehead. One of the things that the band had was they had a number of John Peel sessions. So
Oh, right.
they actually had 4 sessions in
Oh,
total.
that's amazing. You know, we've talked to a few people and they're getting one session has been a massive highlight in their life. To get 4, that's incredible.
I know, and they all talk really fondly of it, don't they? Those John Peel
They
sessions.
do, yeah. They know. I remember one of the guys who spoke to, I think it was Screen 3. For them, it was like going to play, feeling something really special, playing in the studio that so many of the great artists have played in before. So to get 4 sessions is pretty amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, they felt they'd made it, didn't they? Yeah, that first session had a track called a Gigantic Raft.
That song in 2004, more recently, there's a big film came out, which you know, of course, called The Mancunian Candidate with Denzel Washington. And that song was on that soundtrack. Worldwide, the box office has grossed $96 million, which is pretty incredible. So a lot of people would have heard that song through that film.
I think what's interesting about the band is how they developed. So if you listen to that first John Peel session and then you listen to the last session, which was in 85,
yeah,
the tracks that they had there, Rope, Hang On Sleepy Town, Space, and Festival Time. Those songs, I think, are quite different to those first ones. You know, the changes in terms of their melody, their sound was very different.
So like kind of like more advanced almost in terms of the sound.
It felt, whether it's just about production or something else, I genuinely don't know. As you know, the big thing for the band was their hit Driving Away from Home. This was sort of got to number 18 in the charts, and they were signed to Siren Records, which of course we know about.
Siren, because the Faith Brothers were on Siren, along with Then Jericho and of course T'Pol. So we obviously we've come across them in a previous podcast before. Yeah.
What'll be fascinating is when the story of that single, because they got to a point where the record company were pushing the single, and from what I can gather, was working. They had good marketing on it, and then they thought that the momentum of the song would be enough to carry it right the way to the sort of top 10.
So they did. So they kind of shoved it, let it run, and thought, right, it's going to keep going. But then it
what happened was there was a couple of things that happened. One is that they then switched their attention to another band on their roster. I don't know which one, but
remember when we talked to B Movie the guy from Some Bizarre Records, Steve-O, he was managing them and he was managing Soft Cell. But of course, then Soft Cell had Tainted Love, and that did so well that they felt a lot of his attention and went across there. So it might be a similar kind of thing, with
there's
Siren.
a proper trend here, isn't there, in terms of the stories. The other thing that record company that they did, so after they decided that they were going to move to somebody else, they actually ran out of stock. So
what do you mean? Ran out? They didn't make enough vinyl.
Didn't make enough records. Yeah. So
I can't believe that.
So that sort of stalled the advance of that record up the charts.
It kind of does stall it if you can't sell anything. Got anything to sell, does it?
Yeah, exactly.
I've not heard of that one before. That's a classic.
No, and then they tried with another song after that, a song called Ed's Funky Diner. Much more.
Oh, that was a good one. Yeah,
a bit more upbeat.
Yeah, definitely
that one. And interestingly enough, the Christians sang backing vocals on that song.
Oh, so they're another Liverpool band, the Christians, aren't they? So yeah, how interesting that is to hear that. And actually, when we talked to John, we're interested to find out about what other Liverpool artists he knew on the circuit at the time, Pete Wiley and Julian Cope and all those others that are around at the time. It'd be interesting to know what the scene was like, So
well, there was
a proper, about the Christians,
there was a proper scene there, wasn't there? Now, what I was going to say about the Christians was that Henry Priestman, who was part of that original Its Immaterial lineup, he was then part of the Christians. So
right,
maybe there was a link there.
Was he originally in the Yachts?
Yeah.
It was originally in the Yachts, moved to Its Material, and then moved to the Christians.
Yeah. Wow. So they then once they'd done that, then made their first album, Life's Hard and Then You Die. That was then followed up by an album called Song. Didn't perhaps do, from what I can make out, didn't do the numbers or wasn't commercial enough.
So I wanted to ask you, because obviously this is over a period of a few years here, between 85 and 90, I think, that we've been just talking about there. So I'm guessing they must have done a whole load of gigs supporting other people and headline gigs and so on.
Well, there's the rub. I can't really find much evidence of many gigs at all. So I don't know whether they were just a studio band or whether they'd played a few. I found that they'd played at a gig they played in the mid-80s, 85, in Manchester, where they were on the same lineup as the Stone Roses.
Right.
I know they've just done one recently in Liverpool, literally a few months ago, but that's literally the first one they've done for years.
I mean, that's interesting. I mean, I was listening to the Paul Weller, Desperately Seeking Paul podcast. One of the fans there who started a podcast during COVID, and actually the last one that he did was actually met Paul Weller, and Weller was saying, he'd go to the studio every day and write songs, and he loved doing that, but he equally loved getting out and playing live. It kind of drove him, to play to live audiences. So it may be that Its Immaterial did do that. We just haven't got much of a record of it, or it might be that they just prefer to be more of a studio band. It'd be interesting to find that one out. Yeah.
I mean, the sound from the first album into Song into their third album, the production changed a bit, but the songs were still great, the melodies were still great. The third album, called House for Sale, has got a bit of a tale about it. So they sort of started work on that in from what I can make out, 93-ish. They then obviously did their demos. Nothing happened then.
So they didn't complete it in 93.
No, as they were moving a few years ago, they found a box of the original demo tapes, and then they decided to complete the project. But they went through in the mid 2010s, 2016-ish. They used Pledge Music as a way of sort of raising funds to complete the record. I did that. So I did that. I pledged as part of because of just because I love the band. But and what happened was Pledge Music went out of business. Its Immaterial decided that they were going to complete the exercise, and they weren't going to just let it stop them. So they decided what they were going to do was they would complete it, and then they would send that album to all the people that they kept all their details, send that album to everybody that was on the list.
Wow, and that's amazing.
Didn't come out until 2020. So
wow, so that started in 93.
93, yeah.
I mean, fair play to hats off that they actually saw it through and fulfilled, what they felt was a commitment to the fan.
I mean, it's a
Fantastic.
really impressive thing to do.
It is.
I have to say, you can still get it on. It's now on Burning Shed, and the guy that interestingly that was involved in that last album, the Callum Malcolm, his name is. He had already produced their second album, so there's a nice bit of consistency
Oh,
between
right.
the two records. Okay, well,
Yeah.
look, there's a bit of background about the band. Why don't we ask John some of the questions that we've been talking about, because I think there's a really great story here. So, John, welcome to the Uncharted 80s podcast. What we wanted to do is sort of start off a little bit, if it's okay with you, going back
Yeah.
to pre Its Immaterial, perhaps that transition from the band, the Yachts, into Its Immaterial. Could you just talk us a bit about that?
Yes, well, the Yachts came out of an art school band we had. We had a band called Albert Dock, which when I came to Liverpool in 1975 to go to the art school here, and I met a group of kind of like-minded young fellows. And at the time, there was a Liverpool art school band called Deaf School, who were actually still playing concerts occasionally. And they were about to leave. They'd been signed to WEA, and people were wondering who was going to play at the art school dance. So myself and a number of friends got together, and we formed a group called Albert Dock and became kind of the new art school band here in Liverpool. In the very early days of Eric's, which was run by Roger Eagle and Ken Testy and Peter Fulwell, I remember them. We were there. Albert Dock became a house band there, playing on Thursday nights.
Wow. At one time at Eric's, Albert Dock supported the Sex Pistols. That must have been quite an interesting event.
Yeah, I think it became about that because we were always that Thursday night house band for Eric's. So it was quite easy for Roger, Eagle, and Peter to put us in as the support with Sex Pistols when they arrived. But it was a fun night. It's one of those nights when I remember kind of the attendance, and then when I read the amount of people that were there that night, I can't remember that. But yeah, it was fun. They played. There wasn't a kind of an established Eric's venue then, I suppose, because it was split between two venues. There was a club called Rotters on the ground floor of, I think it was Victoria Street. And then on Matthews Street underneath, I think it was called the Revolution, which eventually became the Eric's venue. So the Sex Pistols played upstairs in the Rotters, which had, I suppose, it was quite well known for kind of people like, do you remember people like Faith Brown? And the cabaret kind of acts and all that.
Yeah.
So it was furnished like that, And the Sex Pistols came and played then. I remember, I think Glenn Matlock broke a string, and there was a long period at one point where they just stopped playing. And I don't even think John Lydon or Johnny Rotten said a word to the audience. If I can remember, the audience was at the most about 50 people. There wasn't a lot there. And but it was a very interesting night in that sense. And then the audience that went down the fire escape stairs into the Revolution Club, and we played down there. But during the day, when we were sound checking down there, the Sex Pistols came downstairs to meet us, and they were saying they were slightly worried about meeting us because of the reputation of Liverpool at that time, that they might get into a bit of trouble. But it was fine. They were nice chaps to meet. We had a nice time with them, really. They were gentlemen,
cool.
really.
Yeah.
People like Glenn Matlock, years later, still waving to him in London and whatever, that kind of thing. When we meet up, we chat, pleasant.
Brilliant.
But it was an interesting evening and quite a notable one, as you were saying, with all those people like Holly Johnson, all were aware. It definitely, the energy of that concert did start something in Liverpool. Yeah. Let me see now. It was Roger Eagle, I think, who said, "Well, you lot should actually take this seriously, because we were still all art students and just doing it for fun, really." And he said, "We should take it seriously, maybe slim down a bit, because we were a bit like Deaf School, where anybody who wanted to play with us could get up and play. So the kind of lineup changed every time we played and that kind of thing. So we sat down, a few of us at the core, which was like Henry Priestman and myself and Martin Watson, Martin Dempsey and Bob Bellis, I think, eventually became Yachts. I think myself and Henry lived in the same kind of accommodation. So we kind of thought of, I think at the time, Albert, I was something like 7 or 8. So, and some of them were just dancing and some were playing odd instruments. So we thought, well, let's get the core of a little group, bass, drums, guitar, keyboards, and vocals. And we went down to 5, called it Yachts, by starting at the back of the dictionary and going up to the first
I like that.
name that would be suitable. And we thought Yachts was just like a sound. It was just an odd sounding word. So we thought we'd call it Yachts. And we carried on with that kind of Thursday night residency at Eric's Club. We started playing a few concerts out of town and around, got an agency. And I think we got seen by a couple of chaps from Stiff Records. This all happened probably within about 3 months.
Wow.
And we supported Elvis Costello at Eric's. And Swing Best Management came backstage and wanted to sign us to them. And Stiff said they wanted us to go with them. And they released a single within about a month or something. So we became that kind of third-year art school people who got other people to sign the attendance book for them and were never there. They were doing other things. We were usually in transits going around the country, and yet we were still signed in. I remember, I think we all got kind of the whistle was blown on us when we were confronted by the head of school saying, well, on last Thursday, you were signed in here to be in college, signed in, here's your name, 9:30, yours 10 o'clock, Martin, and so forth. And yet they had a paper, and yet here's your group playing Thursday night in Glasgow. So you weren't there, obviously.
That's brilliant.
So, and that's how Yachts arrived. And then I think I may have been a year or 18 months in Yachts, and I really wanted to finish the art school course. So I made arrangements to go back. And so at that point, Yachts were doing well, I thought. And Martin Watson, who was the guitarist, was a great kind of pop rock singer anyway. So I thought, well, I'll go back and finish my course for a year. So I left Yachts then, and I went back to the art school for a year. And it was during that kind of time at the art school that I met John Whitehead, who we called Jarvis Whitehead.
Yeah.
And I remember him
Middle name.
because I was there with a chap called John Mason, who was one of the ones that was kind of dropped originally from Albert Dock. So I went round to see him at his flat, and he'd got this flat with a chap called Jarvis Whitehead. And we were chatting, and I just heard somebody playing chic bass lines in the other bedroom. And that turned out to be Jarvis, because at the time he was kind of keen on being a bass player. So, and that's how we met. And from there, we kind of formed some kind of beginnings of Its Immaterial, along with Henry Priestman. For some reason, in that year, I went back to complete the art school course, and Yachts kind of turned around quickly, and Henry decided to leave Yachts and came and joined Jarvis and I, who were really. I remember the name was chosen for Its Immaterial was just because it was a few friends in a flat. We were back to that kind of art school thing, but it wasn't serious. We were playing for fun. And we said, let's release a single. And we went around to kind of I suppose what would be called crowdfund, and went around to old friends and everything to chip in, and we released a little single. And we thought, what should we call the group? And there was a bit of discussion and I think it was me or one of that three piped up and said, well, It's Immaterial, what we call them. And we thought, well, that's it then. We'll call it It's Immaterial.
That's great.
And we wrote that down, and that's kind of what the origins of it. The genesis was there, but it was just a bunch of friends really, and it got a little more serious as time went on.
Because you moved to a duo, didn't you? After maybe a couple of years of that.
Well,
84-ish.
there were, yeah, 84. There was let me see. So there was that original kind of independent single release, which was called Young Man. I remember going around to all the little record shops in York. There were several local distributors on the independent scene. We'd lug a few boxes of this record over there and drop them off with them, and it did okay. We managed to sell quite a few of them. But that was recorded in a place called Benson Street Studios, which was the offices of Peter Fulwell, who was one of the managers of the Eric's Club. He decided to become a manager as well. That was another string to his bow. He had a group called Yachts, and they had
Pete Wiley.
Pete Wiley, that's right.
Yeah.
And we had Pete had an 8-track studio, I think it was, down in his offices. So we recorded that Young Man single there because Pete was always kind of when I left Yachts, Pete came round to the house and was really encouraging. He said, whatever I do, he didn't want me to drop any involvement with the music scene here in Liverpool. So he kind of supported and funded things I was interested in. So we did that single there, and then we worked with Pete on, I think, and let me see when that was. Now we had, we became part of a label Pete set up called Eternal Records, which had kind of the flagship band, I think, of Wahid, and the other two kind of fledgling groups at the time underneath was us stumbling around as Its Immaterial, and Colin Verncombe's Black at the time.
Oh, right, brilliant.
Had just kicked off here in Liverpool. So Pete was managing those three groups. So it was. So he managed to cobble something together with WEA as kind of a label deal. So it became, and those three groups were signed to WEA and under the Eternal label. So I think that's where it went next. And we had a single out with on WEA called White Man's Hut.
Take note, said you count the cost.
which was fun to do. I enjoyed doing that, but I didn't really enjoy the relationship with WBA and some of the characters down there. It didn't seem to suit us. I mean, it was maybe too early for us. We weren't stable enough yet to be in kind of with a large record company behind us. We didn't feel right there. So
It's funny because we've interviewed a few different people from a few bands, and they're saying exactly the same. They sign a band and then they try to change them from what they liked in the first place. And it sounds like you experienced a similar sort of thing.
well, I think so. I think they had they had a procedure and a way of working and a way of marketing. And I think people like myself and all those other young musicians who'd come up through that kind of independent scene had their own way of working, and it kind of worked by fluke in a lot. It was just what you did, and to then be kind of putting this kind of on this treadmill and have to go through this procedure A to B to C to D and do it that way. And you'll have a hit record. And many times, I remember when White Man's Hut was released, there was so many released from WBA that week that it was a bit of, you got a sense that it was a bit of, let's just throw it at the wall, all this stuff. Some of it'll stick, and we'll go with those. And so I didn't really feel that there was a long-term future there.
You did a few Peel sessions at that time, didn't you?
We did a lot. We did probably about half a dozen, something like that. And Peel was a real strong advocate of the group in its early days. He was a good man, John Peel. And yes, he played. We did another, I think, before we got to, I think that's probably one of the reasons WBA picked us up as part of this Eternal package. We did a single with Peter Fulwell on his Inevitable. Well, we had that first single we put out, Young Man, was on our own label, which was called The Hit Machine, because we were sure it was going to be a hit.
Nice.
And we kind of merged with Pete Fulwell's independent label, which was called Inevitable. And we put a record out on the Inevitable Hit Machine, which sounded even better. So we put the record out there called A Gigantic Raft. I think the long title was a Gigantic Raft in the Philippines. And that was just a kind of rhythm guitar thing. And we did it in one day in Amazon Studios here in Liverpool. And I think it was based on some chord changes in the rhythm that Jarvis had. And then we just looked through this big second-hand book that was hanging around the flat. I think it was called The Illustrated History of the World. And it just had lots of different pictures. And one picture was of this raft, and underneath it just said A Gigantic Raft in the Philippines. So we called it that. And then we tried to make up some kind of imagery that would go over this rhythm around that title. But Peel played it to death as soon as it came out, all the time. And it did really well independently, sold a lot of copies independently. So Warner Brothers were quite happy to pick us up in this package. And they tried to release Gigantic Raft again as the first single but of course they didn't want the independent release we'd done. They wanted to put us in a studio and throw lots of money at it and do a whole new recording. I suppose, looking back, so that they own the recording if it is a hit. But it was just overdone, I mean, if you can over-egg a pudding, there must have been at least 40-odd eggs in that one or something, because it came out terrible. But that was kind of the first interaction with Warner Brothers, so we were a bit worried. We went on to do White Man's Hut. But after that, we heard there was some kind of umming and ahhing in their A&R department about where to go with us next. And so we jumped and had a conversation with them and said, well, we're not very happy either. And anyway, after some negotiations, we just decided to go each other's way, leave it there. It didn't quite work out for us. I think Black as well split away. I'm not sure whether Pete, it may have been the whole group. I think it may have not been working for that kind of independent Eternal label with Warner Brothers, because I think Pete Wiley went his own way as well now, thinking about it. But it was a very creative place to be in Benson Street, Liverpool, where the Eternal management offices were with Pete Fullwell and the 8-track studio and anything. And you could go in any time and just throw down some demos. And Pete was always extremely supportive, encouraging. So
talking about the studio, you must have come across quite a few of the other Liverpool artists and bands. I don't know, Ian Brodie, obviously Pete Wiley, you've mentioned Julian Cope. I don't know. I guess there's quite a big group of musicians around at the time doing the same sort of thing.
There was, yeah. As everybody knows, a lot of that group of people went through Eric's. So Holly Johnson Holly Johnson I met in Pete Fullwell's kitchen because it was almost an open house at Pete Fullwell's, and anybody who was kind of slightly involved in his independent label or management used to just meet there in the kitchen in the morning. I don't know how Chris, his wife, put up with it, but she did. And so I met Holly there and Ian Brodie. They were all in the kitchen at Pete's. So the main kind of groups that I knew were really from that Eternal label. But I knew everybody else in town socially.
Because your songs from those early days, Young Man, Gigantic Raft and so on, they seemed to evolve really quickly as you went towards that first album. What do you put that down to?
Towards the first album.
Yeah, well, the evolution of the songs, they seem to change from those early releases through to when you got into the situation where you had got Life's Hard, Then You Die.
I kind of know what you mean. I think in those early songs, there was still kind of I don't know. It was very kind of collage. We would just throw things together, and there was a slightly, I suppose, if anything, we had from that independent kind of punk thing was that collage thing. We were interested in many different aspects of music, and I suppose that. Another thing is we kind of stopped shouting a bit as we went on. Things were kind of more about noise and that in those days. We were younger coming out of the punk. And we were always extremely eclectic, I think, and liked lots of different types of music and different kind of imagery. And I think that eclecticism showed more in the songwriting as we got to Life's Hard and Then You Die. And I suppose the structure of the songs, I suppose one way of putting it is we paid more attention to the structure of the songs at that stage and what we wanted as a whole, So I suppose the songwriting developed. It became a little more influenced as well by the notion of kind of short stories or short little films, very visual ideas in the lyrics and in a soundscape, just like a short story. Really, I suppose the idea started to do a lot more kind of narrative talk vocals and to express this kind of story. So just let the rhythm work and tell a story and eventually get to some kind of hook. But it was that notion, I suppose, slightly cinematic as well, that idea.
I mean, that came through in obviously the Driving Away From Home. You've that sort of style of that rhythm and, the way that you sang that.
Yeah. I was always fascinating that notion between a conversation turning into a song is a kind of nice thought, because people have rhythms of speech and cadences, and it only takes it to turn up one more notch and it's a song, it's like.
Well, the 12-inch mix of that song particularly goes through those stages of spoken into singing. So it's a really good example of that.
Yeah.
same to me. I mean, after all, it's just a road. Hey, look, there go the Dukes of Egypt. Yeah.
The gigging's interesting because from what I can see, you didn't seem to be that prolific as a gigging band.
Well, I don't think we ever had a lineup as such, because as I said, Henry kind of joined when Yachts came to an end, and then I think it was just coming up to recording the first album that Henry, we did some work. I think the early recordings of the first album was Ed's Funky Diner. We liked working with the engineer in that session. We thought he was good and understood what we were trying to do. And his name was David Bascom. I think he went on to do all the work for Tears for Fears, and he's well known in the industry. But so I think we were actually David's first production credit, because he did the Life's Hard and Then You Die album as a way to get him the record company was kind of, what's it, Siren Records?
Siren, yeah.
But it was a Virgin satellite, so they were umming and ahhing about Archer. They wanted to choose the producer, and we wanted Dave Bascom. So we came to this agreement that David work on one song with us in Stockport, most Strawberry Studios, I think it was, and he came up and did that track with us. But we'd also met, and Peter Fulwell was starting to do some work with the Christian Brothers at the time. I think he'd seen them on Opportunity Knocks, if we remember, and they were around in Liverpool, and he thought they could do something. He'd got into contact with them, and so they came along to Stockport with us and did some backing vocals for us on Ed's Funky Diner, and Henry, coming out of Yachts, didn't really feel there was place for him in the way we were writing songs like that, because it was Javs and I basically put that first album together. So Henry was feeling slightly himself like a bit of a satellite of us two. So he got together with the Christian Brothers, and they started demoing the Christian first album. So Henry wasn't around all the time then, so then we didn't have a keyboard player again. And I think the drummer went and joined the Christians that we had at the time. So we were always in flux with kind of musicians in the membership. We never really had a settled lineup. So to commit to any kind of touring was difficult anyway. And with John and I, the joy of it all was kind of, although we did like the odd live show, we didn't want to be slogging around, because we enjoyed being in studios and making things,
Because you've just played Liverpool, haven't you? Quite recently.
Did.
How was that?
Yeah, we played 16th of December. It was fun. It was really fun to do it again. We were asked, this is going back to Deaf School, the group Deaf School again. They, as I said when I mentioned them, they still play occasionally. And it was the 50th anniversary, apparently, of Deaf School playing their first art school dance. So they were having this 50th anniversary concert, and then somebody said, well, let's make it an art school kind of night for everybody. And the manager of Deaf School, Ken Testy, who known since the Eric days rang me up and said, can you do it? Can you do this night? And there was only Jarvis and I. So we said, fine. And we were thinking maybe we'll go and do it like we used to do with just a tape machine, or nowadays, I suppose, a computer and the two of us. But and then I had this idea that maybe I should contact Lipper here in Liverpool and see whether I can make it part of a module for some of their students to have some kind of experience of working live in that way. So, and they were very enthusiastic, and I think they'd done it with other bands abroad before now as well. So, but they'd never done it with anybody in Liverpool. So so we put together a group of, I think it was second year students from Lipper, and rehearsed a number of times with them in Lipper. And so we did it with the support of Lipper, and it was great. It was fun. Henry came and joined, so it was myself, Jarvis, and 5 young musicians from Lipper behind us. So we had an 8-piece band, probably the biggest we've ever had. And it was fun. It was really fun to do, So I've been speaking to them. I went to thank the staff at Lipper the other day, and they're very keen to do anything else we feel we could collaborate on. So we might be doing more things this year.
I was going to say, is it giving you a thirst for more?
A certain amount of a thirst. The fun and the enthusiasm and meeting an audience is really tremendous. There's a lot of really kind of downtime and uncomfortable time and hard work that goes into it. It's quite a hard job, really, I think.
Which song went down best with the audience this time?
I don't know. The whole thing seemed to go down okay, but we played the obvious things, Driving Away from Home and Ed Swanky Diner. And we played some off the new album as well. I played Summer Rain off the last album, I should say.
The city streets are shining bright from where I stand beneath the trees. As you walk by, I hear you sing. Yes, I recall those little things, like your voice on the air and the sound as raindrops hit the ground.
The old standards, if we can call them that, I think still go down very well. But Summer Rain went down very well as well from the last album. So that was nice to hear. And the students who played with us really enjoyed it. So that was good as well. It was nice to do that collaboration. And I think that's what enthused Jarvis and I to do it as well. It was something different to try, and it's good.
Well, they say those songs certainly seem to have stood the test of time. Do you still love playing, like Driving Away from Home? Is that something that still resonates with you?
I really enjoyed. There's lots of songs and lots of. It's made me kind of review your back catalogue, even though it's not that extensive. But there are some good songs in there. I remember, and it made us look around because I think, hang on, I haven't got any here. But when Jarvis and I always had, even when we weren't releasing albums, we did things like incidental music for radio plays and bits for theatres. Always doing bits and pieces like that. So we always had a 16-track 1-inch studio, and we'd always meet up there. Over the years, every Thursday we had locked off as a music day. And a social day as well. We'd just get together and make something. And we wouldn't really think for many years about doing it because John Jarvis went on to form a little music school here in Liverpool. And I think after the song album, I went back to art school. But this time as one of the staff, I used to teach in the fine art department for about 10 years there, while still doing odd bits of music. But so we had this 16-track studio that we met every Thursday, and I have in the house somewhere here boxes and boxes of a 1-inch 16-track tape. I haven't got the machine anymore. It wore out with us using it every Thursday over the year. But I've got all these tapes, and there are kind of songs locked in there. So I was talking at Lipper when I went back down. Do they know anybody who's got a 1-inch 16-track I could use? Because we're thinking of maybe trying to get those out, because there are many more Its Immaterial songs than are out there. Many, many more, that have just been on shelves for years and years.
You think if anyone's got one, the Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts, or LIPA, as you say,
That's right.
would be the place.
But they did a funny thing. I remember years ago when it opened, and this is during the time I was teaching at the art school. Professor Fallows, who works at the art school, and myself got involved in the transporting of flatbed Telefunken 1/4-inch mastering machines from the old Abbey Road studio, part of this connection with Paul McCartney, up to Lipper for use by the students of Lipper, I think, to practice editing on and that kind of thing. It was something about 8 months or so, maybe, after they'd arrived here. We heard they got some new equipment and just thrown all these out into the bin. So Colin and I managed to race around there and salvage one of them for the art school, because it was in Abbey Road. It was used by the Beatles,
Wow, I can't believe that.
They just threw them out as old equipment.
What do you say about Som? Because that's obviously, that album didn't appear to get as much exposure as perhaps it should have done in my view, but because there's some great tunes on it.
Yeah, it's my favorite of those, the first two albums anyway, because it's that progression that you were talking about. We did those kind of one-off singles with WEA and the independent things, and they were more kind of collaging words together, so they weren't a story. It was just all collage process, and then we kind of advanced into that more eclectic storytelling style of the first album. And then by the time the second album came, it was something that we'd settled into that style. We wanted to tell stories, and we approached the writing for that as we didn't to the chagrin of the record label, we didn't approach the albums thinking, we want a hit single, we want this. We wanted to release an album of stories, really, just set to musical settings. So that's the way we approached it from day one. And so in that sense, that one is the most successful one for me, because what came out at the end was what I wanted to come out at the end. But unfortunately, because it didn't have an out-and-out hit single choice on it, at the time, I think Virgin were thinking more about starting up their airlines or expanding their airlines. So Richard Branson wanted to start shutting down these kind of satellite labels, not putting the money into the airlines. It was kind of one of the very last releases on Siren just before it disappeared. So it just petered out,
They tried, didn't they? With Heaven Knows. They tried to. That was the single, I think, wasn't it?
Heaven knows. Heaven knows. Last summer, well, I heard you moved away to a house out by the Wing Road, and no room for children to play. I know what it's like when you come round to thinking on how you missed the gravy train on which your family's depending. Heaven knows it's gonna be alright. Things are gonna work out fine.
They tried to they made us put a different chorus on it, and then they'd have a go with it. But it was, I don't know, it was never really a single, I'd have preferred them just to release one of the songs on it, go back to an independent ethics and just put a single song out, not look for a massive hit, but try and intrigue people, that kind of thing. But no, but they did the same. It just made a light bulb go in my head, a memory that of with the first album, when Driving Away from Home was out, Siren, it started to catch on Radio 1, Radio 2 very quickly, and it was getting 30 plays a week or something like this at one stage. But Siren had never really thought that it was an out-and-out hit single, so they didn't press up enough. When it got to 18 in the charts, they didn't have any pressings left. They had to go and repress. So for a couple of weeks, it just disappeared while they didn't have anything in the shops to sell.
Absolute madness, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely. And R&R man, Ross Stapleton, I think one of the other groups he was the A&R man for was who he likes to think he discovered her. And I know he's in contact with them, is Simple Minds. He worked with them from day one as well, and a few other bands. So he really did have a bit of nous for it, and he was a nice man.
I was one of the pledgers who pledged to Pledge Music. Yeah, I know that's had a bad ending with their bankruptcy, but also you took a really, what I would describe as a courageous decision. When that happened, you obviously wanted to finish the album House for Sale, but also you wanted to give back to everybody that had pledged to you. You sent the record, I've got it here, that you sent everybody without sort of charging them another fee. Talk us through that process, because to me, I was already a lifelong fan anyway, but that was something that perhaps didn't get much publicity, much profile as part of that release.
No, I was, as you can imagine, terribly shocked when I heard that news. What I didn't like about the pledge situation was, I suppose it is, people are in jobs, in positions, so they feel they have to keep on doing their job until the last minute or whatever. But it must have been going under for quite a while. And I was still getting masses of encouragement from pledge music staff to carry on. And I realized that I was trying to fulfill my next commitment in delivering the album. And there was a staged plan where they would release money to you. And they weren't releasing these monies. So I was trying to do the work, complete the album. I was doing it with no money from them anyway. So when they have finally collapsed, there was a lot of commitment from people out there. We didn't want to kind of break any kind of faith or any ties with them. We thought, well, if we can put it out and sell enough so that we can give those people the record they pledged for and break even through the other sales, that'll be a win for us, just doing that to get out of there, So we decided to plow ahead and do that. And we did it through friends supporting us. We set up a Just Giving page with people. We went all different ways to find funding to do it, and we reimbursed where we could of that. It was a terrible place to find yourself in, because there was also kind of the idea of Pledge being a shop as well with everybody there. So it was another place to go from. But luckily enough, I got in contact with a chap at Burning Shed who used to like the group. So he said he'd look after that kind of distribution end for us if we could just get it pressed. So we carried on, got it pressed, and luckily enough, it covered all the debts we had, and everybody got their album. So we're happy at this end.
And do you look back now, what's your standout tracks from that?
There are interesting tracks on that album because they really did evolve. Well, for me, one of the tracks, I was talking about the notion of short stories. For me, I've always really liked Just North of Here.
Well, it's a funny kind of question to come straight out and ask, but that's exactly what he did. Where's heaven? Just like that. Where's heaven? Well, I was minding my own business over lunch in the chop house when this stranger started talking to me. He looked a little agitated and said he needed just one answer. Where's heaven? Well, what could I say? I don't
kind of structure of it, how it does start in a location, and it's a conversation that, as we said before, turns into a song as it goes. And it actually does. The first choruses are spoken, and then they're half spoken, half sung. Then at the end of the song, you just get a full chorus. So it really builds that way. So that, and the last song we did for it, which was "Summer Rain," that came right at the end, and that was a few chords. We started the whole thing. It was one of those things. It was the brackets that kind of opened it and ended it. We started with "Summer Rain," and I think it was a demo called "Amanda" for some reason when we started.
It's funny. There's a few of the demos sort of trickled out, didn't they, over the years? There was one called "Several Brothers."
Oh,
and
yeah.
that's one that I was surprised didn't make it onto the album.
Yeah, yeah. One of the last kind of demos I think we did in the Benson Street studios for Life's Hard at that point. So it was quite an early.
Well, that's maybe that's the fourth album. Do you think?
Well, there's stuff lying around. We keep saying we've got. I don't think there was. I pressed a CD once and did a sleeve for it, and I printed about 10 of them off and gave them to friends and people I know in the industry with a suggested other kind of Its Immaterial album. And I'd called it Record. I've had people in America and Canada coming back to me saying they bought Record, the album. And some people have got hold of this CD and are producing it.
Wow, that's incredible.
Well, if you had a favourite memory from your time in Its Immaterial, what would you say that would be?
Lots of favourite things, like musical things, like we did Rope on the first album. I think Steve Wickham was in the other room. I think they were doing Whole of the Moon in the other room, and he came in and just played some fiddle for us.
But love Steve Wickham. Love all that Waterboy stuff. Fantastic.
Yeah. They were great. They were really nice people as well. Ignit just played, and that's one of the good things of the album, because it had so many other musicians on. Because I said before, the nuclei of the band was Jarvis and I. So quite often there'd be days in that studio on the first album where it'd just be me, Jarvis, and Dave Bascombe there. Then if the Waterboys were in, we'd quickly get up a track we thought a violin and ask them, they'd nip in. And so we kept just it was in North London somewhere, that studio. I can't remember what it's called now. But yeah, so I enjoyed moments like that. And when we were doing on that time when we were doing Driving Away From Home, we did some of the recording for it in Milwaukee on the 16th of December. It was my birthday, so we went out to this local concert hall, and there was a big round of applause for Jerry Liedner, who was a local musician who'd come home for Christmas from Nashville. And so this Jerry got on this stage with a big belt of harmonicas, blues harps, and started joining in with the local band and playing a few tracks. And so at the end of that night out, we just went up to him and said, we've got this track called Driving Away From Home. Jim Liedner was it? He said, could you come and just play harmonica on it just for an hour or two? So he said, I can't. I'm flying back tomorrow. I just came home, see the family, and flying back to Nashville tomorrow. So we were all, and then he said, well, I'll tell you what, on the way to the airport, I'll just drop in for half an hour or something, So he did. He was as good as his word, and he dropped in, and in about half an hour, he played all that harmonica and Driving Away From Home. And then just to see, we only met him for about an hour in our entirety. So we just called it Jim's tune, because he made such a difference really quickly, just dropped in. But that was a good memory, just meeting him and kind of lots of moments on song, great little moments happened there because we decamped to North Berwick in Scotland and worked with Callum Malcolm, who was a really lovely man to work with. We were there for about 6 months or something. So there were crazy moments like we'd be sat in the studio and just thinking what we should do with one of those soundtracks. And Callum Malcolm had a good sense of humour and was very playful. And he'd say, should we go to the Jim Clark Museum in Duns? I said, what do you mean? So Jim Clark, the old Scottish race driver, he lived on a farm in Duns, and there's a museum there with a couple of his cars in it. Drive off to Duns and have a look at the cars, and then on the way back, Callum had like tape a lot of batteries together onto a mic, and he'd take us to a cave down that he knew from being a boy, and we'd have snares with us and just make some samples and take those back to the studio. So all that kind of thing was going on.
Thank you for sharing those stories. They are superb. I know people are going to love the episode and really appreciate it.
Good to meet you. All right, chaps.
Great.
Good to meet you. Have a good year, both of you.
Thank
All
you.
right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you
Bye.
soon.
Good to meet you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
How it makes me jump. What's that sound? Rumors do abound. In twisted tales, no truth prevails. Two tongues do expound. Now the wise are wide awake. Rise and take your heed while you're asleep. Fools speak, spinning as they weave. Look, the rope is breaking. Saints alive will fall. And this house is burning down. Save us one and all. With or without reason, fever needs a cure. Yes, my son, I'm blind and dumb. These things I do endure. In heaven's name, there's no time to grieve. The truth is dead, I've heard it said. Take care what you read. Look, the rope is breaking. Saints alive will fall. And this house is burning down. Save us one and all. Look, the rope is breaking. Saints alive will fall. And my life is upside down, walking up the wall.
Well, thank you for listening to this episode of the Uncharted 80s podcast. As you know, we do our research from a variety of sources. Of course, if you want to add any more details to what we've talked about or correct us on anything, then you can, of course, contact us. Where can they contact us, Noel?
Well, they can contact us on our email address, which is podcast@uncharted80s.com.
Brilliant. Or you can do that via our Facebook group, the Uncharted 80s. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Thank you.